would not have had a chance to work with otherwise. I'm going to tell you a little bit about them in a second, but just to know that how far we've come in a few months, that it took an hour of sitting in my basement office just to come up with this composite title. I wouldn't let them leave until they came up with it, but our title is The Persisters, New Gender Narratives, and I'm delighted to introduce Stephanie Ospino, who is a senior at Lang in culture and media, and her senior thesis is reflected in this piece, is about reclaiming activist women's narratives that have been erased from history. And then to introduce to you Linda Hsu, who was next door. She's a dual degree student pursuing integrated design with a focus in sustainable cities at Parsons for design and philosophy at Lang. She has a minor in art and design and history and theory. Her creative practice is grounded in ancient handicrafts, critical theory, and research on philosophical and political implications of history, display, and invention. She is the director of digital applications and design at Project Continua, a living digital archive of female biographies. And last but not least, Carol Brown is a junior. She's a double major in literary studies with a concentration in writing and a major also in psychology. As a poet, she has work that's published in Germ magazine, 12th Street magazine, and on Indie Feed. I think I'm missing one thing there, but
media.
There we go. She will be reading excerpts from poems that are critically examining both womanhood and girlhood, which she hopes to produce as a chapbook. I just learned what that was. It's a small grouping of poetry poems. And she plans also to do a one-person theater production of this cycle of poems. So thank you so much for coming.
Hello, everyone. So for those who don't know, the Young Lords, they were a revolutionary Puerto Rican nationalist group that operated out of Spanish Harlem, also known as El Barrio. So they were active from the 1969 to the 70s, to the early 70s, and so they basically set up many community programs based on what the community told them they needed. So they did this garbage offensive where the community told them that they needed garbage picked up. So they picked up the garbage, and then they took a more aggressive approach, and they piled it up in a main intersection, lit it on fire, and finally they started picking up their garbage because the Department of Sanitation was kind of just not picking up their garbage. They would do it in the Upper East Side, but not in Spanish Harlem. So to them, that neglect was oppression. So the Young Lords decided to do something about it. They also did the People's Church, in which they asked the church in the community to do a free breakfast program, and they didn't want to, so they took it by force in the middle of Mass, and then they were beaten by cops in the middle of church. But finally they were able to do it, and they called it the People's Church. So they also did other things. They did community testing for tuberculosis, lead poisoning testing, free clothing drives, cultural events, and Puerto Rican history classes. So when I first learned about the Young Lords, I was in an all-girl high school, and it was just very interesting but not groundbreaking to learn about this male-dominated group. But I rediscovered them in college in a Latin American history course, and to me, I saw this documentary called Palante by former Young Lord member Iris Morales, and she showed more of the women's side, and that's when I started connecting more with them. I finally saw the pivotal role that women played in the movement. So to me, when I started thinking about my thesis, I decided to do an oral history of the role of women in the Young Lords, because I, as a working class Latina growing up in New York City, I felt a deep connection to them. Not only because of that, because I was getting involved in activism. I was getting involved in the Dream Team here on campus, so I decided to kind of reclaim their histories and talk about and to learn more about them, follow in their footsteps. I just thought it was interesting because, like, the Black Panthers, whom they were also very involved with, the stories of these activist women had been left untold. So I thought, why not talk about, discuss their gender narratives. And at the time, it was the perfect time to start my research because there was a citywide exhibit on the Young Lords at the Bronx Museum of Art, Museo del Barrio, Loisaida Center. So I went, I attended panels at NYU. At the New York Public Library, they had every issue of Palante, which is the newspaper they sold for 25 cents throughout the city because many of the Young Lords were full-time members. So many of the Young Lords were full-time members, so this is how they would support themselves, by selling the newspaper for 25 cents. And then I found out that the women would sign off their articles with "Forward Sisters in the Struggle." So I thought that was interesting. So throughout this journey, I learned so much about the women of the Young Lords. They successfully overcame machismo within the Young Lords. They had a 13-point program, which with one of the points, it said machismo must be revolutionary, not oppressive. I mean, clearly that was written only by a man, and there's no way machismo can be revolutionary. And when I interviewed Mickey Melendez, founding member of the Young Lords recently, and I asked him what he was thinking when he wrote that. He said that he would be embarrassed to tell me, even if he remembered it. So they were able to successfully amend it eventually. And they amended it to, "We want equality for women, down with machismo and male chauvinism." And it was just a struggle for them. They called it the revolution within the revolution. They held Lysistrata reading groups, and then they had a sex strike because many of them were dating male members. So they were finally able to get into positions of power. And not only that, but their feminism was very intersectional in that they also advocated for gay and trans rights. They collaborated with trans activist Silvia Rivera to fight back against police repression. And as I learned more about the women of the Young Lords, I realized how important my work is. I'm reclaiming the history of activist women that hasn't been told yet. And like former Young Lord member Minerva Soya, who I also interviewed a couple weeks ago, she told me, "La lucha continúa, the struggle continues." Thank you.
The struggle does continue because, as Stephanie, I should talk in front of the mic. As Stephanie was explaining, this is pretty new history. This has only occurred within the past 60 years. But women who have been a part of every social, political, and cultural movement have consistently and persistently been erased from history. And this is a pretty ancient thing. Women were never part of the official cultures of teaching and learning. And yet, despite this, they were still curious, they were still eager to fill and satisfy their appetites for learning and their curiosity. And so, despite being excluded from schools, they persisted and they contributed intellectually and culturally, and oftentimes at the risk of death. But what happens is that their contributions get forgotten throughout time. And Project Continua is a network of scholars and students that exists at the New School and also beyond. We have relationships with other scholars at different universities and students, and it's a really collaborative effort to reclaim these histories of women forgotten throughout time and throughout the globe. And last semester, with a group of integrated design students, Kat Collier, Chloe Snower, and Sarah Scopani, we developed Persisters, which I will pass around. And it's a zine for young girls, middle school and high school aged, to experience and learn a brief synopsis of their biographies because it really fully isn't enough. And I came to this project through my professor, Gina Luria Walker, and she has been doing feminist historical recovery for her entire academic career of over 40 years. And she came to this through Mary Hayes. And Mary Hayes was a autodidact. She taught herself how to learn everything that she knew. And she compiled this encyclopedia of female biographies. And so Gina came to this when she was writing her doctoral thesis. And ever since, she's been looking for women who have been sort of erased and written out of history and trying to reclaim and recover their biographies. Oops. And we also integrate some more well-known figures like Gloria Anzaldúa because I think she's so pertinent to contemporary issues of today. Especially in her writing, she speaks of the new mestiza, which is sort of this transcendence of a binary paradigm of being either or, and this is rooted in her identity as a Chicana born in Texas, feeling like an alien in a country that you are supposed to be a citizen in. And Audre Lorde, whose poetry, in my mind, advocates for acceptance. He Yinzhen, someone that my parents who were born and educated in China still do not know. People in China have never heard of this woman, this anarcho-Chinese feminist who moved to Japan in the early 1900s and founded a publication that translated the first Chinese translation of the Communist Manifesto, a single text that changed China's history, China's modern history forever. This is the first, she compiled the first computer program and came to this idea and was inspired by women weaving using punch cards and jacquard looms. And she saw the similarity between the machines that they used and the analytical machine, which is considered to be the first computer, which also used these punch cards. And throughout, there's these subtle hints of narrative that are pushing young girls in directions of solidarity and acceptance, and also courage to stand up against challenges misogyny, because that still persists today. And Artemisia Gentileschi is a Baroque painter whose father studied under Caravaggio, and we wanted to address things like domestic abuse, sexual violence through these biographies as something that has reoccurred but is not acceptable, and to create a community of solidarity so that girls can find themselves amongst other people and find safety, and also know that these things have happened, that there's ways to pick yourself back up again. Veronica Franco, we often think of Renaissance men as polymaths who are good at everything, and we forget that there were women who were like that too, namely Veronica Franco, who was an honored or honest courtesan, and she founded a school to teach other young women philosophy and poetry and literature. Maha Pashupati is the adopted mother of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, and she, along with 500 women, marched to declare and demand that Buddha allow women to be ordained in the monastic life. And as a consequence of this, she started the oldest female ordination lineage. And in a lot of Buddhist temples in Southeast Asian countries today, women aren't even allowed to step foot because they're considered to be a distraction. This is the poetry of Sappho, and this is an image of papyrus. And Sappho was someone that we want to include because she's also a poet, and this poetic theme runs throughout the entire zine, but also because she speaks about feelings that I think are relatable to everyone. Love and the bittersweetness, jealousy that accompanies it. And last but not least, or rather first, is Enheduanna. How many of you have heard of Enheduanna? I mean, you guys have, because I've spoken about her a million times by now. But she is part of the inception of this legacy that we're inheriting today. She is the first author for whom we have evidence for to use the pronoun I, to declare herself as an author of her own text, and to liken herself to someone more powerful than her father, who was a king, a goddess, the moon goddess. And she was a part of the inception of using narrative as a mechanism for asserting autonomy, identity, and selfhood. And to carry that legacy, Carol is going to read you, or recite to you, some of her poems.
So I have some poems from a series I've been working on entitled Inventory, and sort of thinking about womanhood and girlhood and what those words mean in general. So I'm going to start with the prologue of this series, and then there's a couple of pieces after that. Just like, from the woman to her memory. Let me tell you a story about birth. One day, the girl came home from school, and the walls bent around her, absorbed her back into the womb. That was how it happened. Except the floor was covered in broken glass. When she touched it, got her fingers all cut up, cried an ocean over it. The ocean was the womb. I know this. That was how it happened, except she turned her pain into sea glass. Or maybe it was a horde of fallen leaves to begin with. Or maybe it was a field of writhing snakes. They swallowed her all up. Maybe that was how it happened. Except the girl, the one in all the photographs. She learned to walk on water, danced out into the blissful ocean, never came back. She's better off that way. She's better off with the ocean. Except the sharks, they come hunting in her head sometimes, so it's hard to know for sure. But I know she's in a better place. The womb. But maybe she drowned. Maybe no one ever noticed. Maybe a diver found her body, limp and broken, on the ocean floor. Maybe that diver made a fortune. Maybe a girl is someone else's fortune. Maybe that's how it happened. Or maybe it was simple. One day the girl just lay down in bed, fell off a table. She tried to put herself back together. Maybe she missed a piece. Maybe that piece is in the house still under a table. Maybe the new tenant sold it at auction. Maybe they made the fortune. Maybe that's how it happened. Where the girl went into the ocean, that is to say, her own body. Maybe that's why I can't find her. Because she's inside me. Lost or dead. Maybe that's how it happened. Where the girl became woman. Memory is a ravenous beast. It eats everything in sight. Memory, that ocean that lives in my body. I don't know where I came from. Memory ate the whole house after we were done with it. Now you. Memory. The story. Ravenous beast. You are all I have left. When you first saw the girl, it was in an old photograph. You and your mother were packing boxes, then, all of a sudden, there she was, grinning at you, peeking over the edge, cheeks swollen and gluttonous around her sharp, white teeth. The girl has little blonde ringlets, the kind designed to wrap around a finger like a wedding band. You want to yank them from her head. Just watch them spring back into place, utterly unattached. In the photo, she is shirtless. Little pink toddler nipple printed on a pouch of toddler fat. She wears leggings, dark blue, pressed up over her knobby knees. The girl in the photo is covered in sand. She watches her wriggling toes. She watches her hands. She has a body and is not yours. She doesn't even know you're here. You have never even occurred to her. The girl knows nothing of woman. She is an island frozen in time. She speaks a soft, gurgling language. Quiet. Shh. 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 Like surf washing over the beach at sunset. Shh. Like blood flowing through veins. When you first saw the girl, you felt her heartbeat in your hands. Distant memory. When you first christened yourself woman, you bought a book of matches and a tank of gasoline. You locked the girl away in the bedroom. You poured gasoline in a delicious waterfall over the carpet until the whole house smelt of destruction. You lit the first match. Let it fall. Careless cardinal from your shaking fingers. You stood aside, watched that gluttonous creature feast, that blaze, until the girl stopped screaming altogether, just whimpered quietly in the dark. And yes, it was you. Burned the whole house down with the girl locked inside. You were that arsonist, turned woman to fire, renamed your body ash, shattered glass. That was you. I watched. You made weapon where there was just word. Burned the whole house down with it. But weapons do not arise in a vacuum. Someone manufactured that gun. Did not just appear in your hand with the safety off. Someone made that. There was no grenade until someone decided the necessity of explosion. There was no arson until someone decided Their neighbor's house needed burning. Someone manufactured that gun, sold it to you for the skin on your thighs, showed you how to cock it, breathe out for pulling the trigger. Someone gifted you fuck, fat bitch, cunt, worthless slut, dirty whore. You lit the fire, you fired that shot, but you did not weaponize woman. Cunt existed long before you killed the girl with it. Take off your clothes, he commands. And you do. Peel your shirt over your head. It dropped to the floor like a deflated balloon, billowing, warping as it flutters down. He taps the top button of your jeans. A gentle gesture, but demanding, expectant. You obey. Your fingers dropping to the button, tugging it free to slide the fabric slowly from your hips. You stand before him, a grotesque thing, pure object, the image of yourself, and he makes a show of you. Clothed you are woman. There is shelter in that word. It is the roof over your head. But when you stand in front of him, naked, and he names you, you are a homeless, shivering thing, a wordless being, skin red raw, covered in ash, goosebumps and cold sweat, without woman to hide inside. You become almost the girl, the impossible image of yourself again. You watch her move towards him. You watch her fold into his lap. You watch her, or not her, move, stay frozen. Watch and act. You are shamed. Your head ripped back by the hair. He sees it. I see it. We all see it. You are ashamed. Girl filling you up, helpless, innocent, despicable thing, rising from the ashes in your gut, until you are tenuous surface tension, threatening to spill over, to make a grand mess of this. You are ashamed. Till the blood. Then you are. And when he is finally finished with you, you collapse into him, soft. He holds you. You are a girl. Wordless. A broken thing, but an honest one. There are no words for it. Just body. No foreign name printed on your skin. No woman, just body. His hands, quiet on you, accepting every breath to rise fall in your chest.
So one of the questions that they were asked by other folks who watched this, and I thought it was a really apt question, was what women inspired them and their work? And I was hoping we could start with that question, and then maybe some of you have questions for them as well.
Sure. So for me, it was young Lord Minerva Soya. When I interviewed her, I asked her why she became a part of the Young Lords, and she told me that, you know, she was kind of a lost soul. She was a girl of the streets. She was about to get involved in like drugs and like gangs, and then one day she heard that one of the Young Lords was doing a talk at Brooklyn College, and she went, and the next day she enrolled. And to her, that was like her school. That was like her foundation. That's how she like learned about Puerto Rican history. And they were a very like drug-free group and just a very safe space for someone like her. So she says that she'd been saved. And like, to me, that's really awesome. That was like, to her, she said that was like her school. She like graduated kind of and went on to have a really good job, and she's like always been about the struggle. She like always remembers her roots, and like even like when I went to interview her, she had just come back from the Fight for 15 march in Albany. When I first met her, she had just gone to she did the march all the way to DC with Black Lives Matter. And she's like in her 60s. She's married to a Black Panther. Like she's the real deal. So I think that's, for me, that was like really inspiring. And it's just like she just leads a life of activism. Like no matter how old she is, she's just always about this life. And that's really inspiring to me to like read about her at my age and like meet her now and realize that she never stopped doing what she's passionate about. So she's who inspired me. I don't know. Who wants to go next?
Either way, I'll talk. I think the last time I answered this question, my answer, which still stands, was loud, pain-in-the-ass lady poets, which to me covers a lot of women who refuse to be silent and are very much like always about pushing their craft forward, but also having their craft mean something, having their craft stand for something. So in my head, definitely Audre Lorde's on that list. She's very much a pain-in-the-ass lady poet who refuses to be quiet or refused, technically. Her work is still very loud, to be silenced, and always stood for like anti-hegemonic values. Also, Jeanne Verlee, who's a current spoken word poet, Andrew Gibson, who was one of my first introductions to spoken word poetry and is a queer spoken word poet who also refuses to be quiet about most things. Olivia Gatwood, I can keep going, but just like loud lady poets in general.
So many. There's a little part in every woman's biography that I've encountered that has really inspired me, and it's taking these little parts and building up sort of this portfolio of inspiration to keep myself motivated. But I think for today, since this is the Dean's Honor Symposium, I'm particularly inspired by Diotima. And Diotima was a part of this symposium, the original Plato Symposium, but in a very removed way. And so a symposium in the Greek tradition is like an intellectual drinking game, but we're not doing that. And Socrates, usually he's displayed through, he's portrayed through Plato's writings as an interlocutor of making one realize some philosophical, groundbreaking thing about virtue or goodness or justice etc. But this time he introduces a story of Diotima, and she was a real living philosopher and an authority of her time in ancient Greece, and she talks about love. And this is something that Socrates, I think previously just didn't understand. And she talks about love as a spirit that is an intermediary between mortality and immortality. And in order for humankind, who is doomed to this fate of mortality, sorry, this is so long, but yeah, so anyways, the only way to strive to become immortal is to pass on your wisdom, to continue the legacy of knowledge. And she is someone who I look to in my studies in philosophy, because it's totally a heavily male-dominated field, and it traditionally has been as a discipline.
We're almost at time, so we probably have time for one question.
Yeah? Does anybody have any questions for this?
I have a small question for you. What kind of lessons from the Young Lords do you think current activist groups can take away from?
So I actually asked that to Minerva. I asked her, what kind of advice do you have for budding activists? And she kind of just said, just do whatever you have to do to keep going. The struggle continues, and just keep on fighting, and it'll all be worth it in the end. Even if it doesn't seem like there's results, just really put your whole life into it. She her whole life was dedicated to it. She didn't take a traditional route, so it was just about following your heart and just continuing and keeping the struggle going, kind of. Yeah.
We have one last question before we have to wrap up. Okay, a question for the future, since you're all young. What do you see happening as next steps to make women's places better in cultural production or society at large? Do you see it getting better and soon, or do you see big? I'm just kind of curious, from your perspective, how does the future look?
Hopeful, I would like to think. Project Continua has just, we just went to a middle school last Friday and taught some 7th grade girls about the Little Mill Girls and the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire and the women affected and who were formed afterwards. So we're conducting, and we're trying to make this a permanent thing. We're teaching pre-college students about these histories, because this is knowledge and information that isn't within traditional curriculum. So it's a bit of revisionism, and hopefully that will be part of the change. I'm hopeful. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm also hopeful, and I think it's important for us to reclaim these histories so that they're out there for future generations, so they can learn about these women the way we all learned about them, and so it can be more readily available, and they realize how strong women are and how they can make a change in the world. So I think that's really important. That's why I feel our work is really important, because it's so we can inspire future generations to keep going. Yeah.
I think I'm also hopeful on some level. I have also done some teaching, and that's sort of a direction I'm going, sort of the teaching artist direction. I've definitely worked with people younger than me, middle school, high school students, specifically young women who have stories to tell and are willing to tell them, which I think is some of the first part of creating new history. But also we do still live in a system that teaches women to be silent. And I think that that's something that just even in the production of this panel that the three of us have struggled with. And that I've definitely struggled with over time, is saying no, I have a thing to say, that thing is valuable, and it's okay to take up time and space to say a thing and to say it loudly and to use your own words to say important things, and understanding that your words are important. And that's sort of something I hope to give to people that I work with. It's no, you are important, especially female bodied people and people of femme experiences who are marginalized in that way. But there definitely are a lot of like up and coming young women who have very strong voices and who have had more like role models to say like her voice matters and so mine does too, which I think is really cool.